The story begins in a smithy, where the protagonist, named Bill, raises his hammer and grabs a log. He activates his golden hand ability, invoking a divine connection with Mjolnir through magic. He levitates an iron bar and places it in position, preparing to forge it into a sacred relic. As he strikes the iron while chanting Amino Maitosu, the bar begins to glow intensely, finally transforming into a radiant sword known as the Sacred Lightreaver. Later, in the living room of his new home, which doubles as a workshop and a newlywed nest for him and his fiancée, Bill receives devastating news from his fiancée, named Seer Hassan. She informs him that she has decided to break off the engagement. Surprised, Bill immediately asks why, reminding her that their union was arranged by both their parents and that according to the agreement, he would inherit the family smithy while she would take control of her family's trading company. In response, Seer reveals that she has fallen in love with another man, and as she speaks, she glances toward the door, where another man is standing. He enters the room and embraces her in front of Bill, who is horrified to discover that it is his own brother, Second. Stunned, Bill demands to know when it all began. Second replies that their relationship started after Seer's father died, when she was in mourning and Bill had prioritized work over her. Seer adds that unlike Bill, Second comforted and supported her during that difficult period. Bill, trying to justify himself, explains that he had no choice, as he was working tirelessly to save the Hassan Trading Company from collapse. But Second scoffs at him. He mocks his effort, claiming the company's recovery was pure luck, thanks to the timely arrival of a major client. As Bill watches in disbelief, Seer intervenes, not to defend him, but to claim it was her own determination that saved the company. After her father's death, she refused to give up and fought to keep the business alive. Bill trembles with rage, because even if all that were true, he can't believe they betrayed him like this, especially after they built a house and opened a new shop together. However, Seer responds with a mocking apology and tells Bill he has to move out, declaring the house now belongs to her and Second. She adds that it wouldn't be appropriate for the ex-fiancé to live under the same roof. Filled with fury, Bill asks why they can't just live at Seer's family estate, since the Hassan Company building belongs to her. But Seer flatly refuses, claiming she is now the head of this household, and her pride won't let her accept anything less. Confused, Bill demands to know what she means by that, and in response, Second places his hand on Seer's belly and announces that she is pregnant with his child. Filled with rage, Bill grabs him by the collar and demands to know if he's serious. Second tells him to calm down, warning that he might scare Seer. Only then does Bill notice her holding her belly, realizing the truth. Immediately, he shoves Second aside and turns to leave, saying that if that's how it is, they can have the house and the shop. Just as he reaches the door, Seer asks him to stop. Now, she begs him not to abandon the shop, claiming that her company still needs the weapons he forges. However, Second interrupts, insisting that he will take over the smithy from now on, and although Seer tries to object, Bill has heard enough. He opens the door and leaves, declaring that from this moment on, none of it has anything to do with him. As he walks away, Second stares at the door, vividly remembering a conversation with his father as a child. He had asked why he always favored Bill, insisting he could also take over the family smithy. However, his father replied without hesitation that Bill was a once-in-a-millennium genius, a man blessed by the gods with a golden hand, whereas both he and his father were, by comparison, simply mediocre. Hearing that, Second burst into tears, yelling at his father not to look down on him and demanding to know how he could call his own son mediocre. Since then, Second has deeply resented his brother for having their father's trust, for being blessed with talent, and for having a beautiful fiancée. That resentment slowly turned into hatred, and it was precisely that hatred that drove his decision to plot a scheme to take everything from his brother. Just then, someone knocks on the door. It opens, and a young woman enters the smithy, accompanied by knights and carrying a bouquet of flowers. She asks if anyone present can tell her where to find Master Hapasai. Seeing her, both Second and Seer are stunned before hastily bowing, as the young woman before them is none other than Princess Anna Rose of the Kingdom. Anna Rose apologizes, clarifying that she actually wanted to ask for the owner of the Hapasai smithy. She explains that she had heard Bill Kraft had opened his own workshop and brought a bouquet to congratulate him, which leaves Second completely confused, wondering why a princess would visit a common smithy and how she even knows him. Then, Anna Rose approaches Seer, recognizing her as the daughter of the president of the Hassan Trading Company and as the woman who was engaged to Bill. She congratulates her and tells her how lucky she is to be marrying such an extraordinary man, leaving Seer completely bewildered. Annoyed, Second clarifies that the engagement between Bill and Seer has been called off, and that he also left the workshop, so he is now the new owner of the Hoppusai smithy. Anna Rose is very surprised to hear this, but she quickly regains her composure. As she connects the dots, a sly smile appears on her face. She asks if Second is the one who will be taking over the smithy, to which Second confidently replies that he is. He places a hand on his chest, assuring her that he will assume full responsibility for the workshop and everything it entails. However, Anna Rose immediately notices the absence of a mark on his hand, the symbol of Hoppusai mastery, and bursts out laughing, finding it absurd that someone like him would dare make such claims with such unfit arms. Still laughing, she turns to leave, saying her business here is finished, leaving both Second and Seer completely confused. Once outside, she orders one of the knights to immediately cancel all dealings with the Hassan Trading Company. The knight obeys without question, after which she issues another directive, this time an emergency one. She orders them to find Bill using all available resources, noting that he couldn't have gotten far. One of the knights, with some hesitation, asks why it's so important if Bill's brother is now taking over the family smithy. Anna Rose turns to him and asks if he really knows nothing about what it means to be a Hoppusai. Meanwhile, Bill is by a quiet lake. He's skipping stones across the water's surface as he processes everything that happened. He has made a decision. No matter what, even if they come crawling back with apologies, he will never return to the capital. With that firm resolve, he activates his golden hand and calls upon the connection with the divine hammer Mjolnir. As the circular mark on his hand glows and a hammer resonates, he remembers a childhood conversation when he asked his ailing grandfather what a Hoppusai was. His grandfather explained that a Hoppusai is a blacksmith blessed with the golden hand, a rare gift passed down through generations. Prying further, the old man revealed that the golden hand grants a unique forging ability, and that all Hoppusai in history possessed one. As he remembers this, Bill tosses a gold coin into the air and activates his ultra alchemy skill, striking the coin in midair, transforming it into a small ingot of pure gold. Although this would be enough for him to travel for years, he knows better than to flood the market with such items, as it could cause an economic crisis. He also recalls his grandfather revealing that most bearers of the golden hand receive only one ability. But he, Bill, was different, as he possesses 5 distinct forging abilities, making him the only Hoppusai in recorded history with such power. It was then that his grandfather gave him the hammer, telling him that the Hoppusai had perfected their art for generations to forge divine artifacts, and entrusted him with the sacred relic he himself had created, the divine hammer Mjolnir, declaring that from that moment, Bill was the new Hoppusai. That is how Bill inherited both the workshop's name and the sacred artifact from his grandfather, Henkei Craft. Since then, he has maintained the city's barrier, the hero's sword, and countless sacred relics, all under the king's orders. Meanwhile in the kingdom, Princess Anna Rose explains to a knight that the reason the kingdom remains at peace is because Bill's sacred name as a Hoppusai still resides there. Understanding the gravity of Bill's absence, the knight warns that the barrier could be in danger. However, the princess reassures him, saying that Bill recently reinforced the barrier and it should remain stable for at least a year. The knight asks if they should inform the heroine, Carolina, about the situation. But Anna Rose tosses her bouquet aside and replies that it's not the time yet. Besides, Bill had recently performed maintenance on the sacred sword, so unless a horde of ancient dragons suddenly attacks the kingdom, everything should remain stable. With that assurance, the princess issues a direct order. Find Bill immediately to ensure the protection of the barrier and the safety of the capital, an order the knights obey without hesitation. Anna Rose, for her part, knows that Carolina trusts Bill not only as a master craftsman, but also as a man. And now that Bill is finally single, the princess believes it's the ideal time to win his heart before someone else does. Meanwhile, Bill uses his ability to open his storage box, and as a black container appears, he tosses the gold bar inside for travel money. He then reveals that the maintenance work was something his father took on after his grandfather's death, simply to put food on the table. However, since maintenance isn't the true function of a Hoppusai, he believes Second can handle the workshop without a problem. What he learned from his grandfather is that the true role of a Hoppusai lies elsewhere. After giving him the divine hammer Mjolnir, his grandfather explained that it was a model, an artifact created to inspire him in his future work. With that, he shared his last wish, that Bill fulfill the true mission of a Hoppusai. As he began to cry, his grandfather stroked his head tenderly, and in a weak voice, told him he must forge original sacred relics and offer them to the heavens. After uttering those final words, he passed away, while Bill tearfully hugged him. Remembering that moment, Bill understands that his grandfather was guiding him all along. He then throws a stone into the air and strikes it in mid-flight with the divine hammer, transforming it into an SS-rank teleportation crystal, an artifact capable of sending its bearer to a place they have never been. Crushing the crystal, he orders its activation and displacement. And as the magic begins to work, he reflects on the fact that now, being recognized as a legendary craftsman like his grandfather, he has decided to travel the world to perfect his skills and find new sources of inspiration, with the ultimate goal of forging a sacred relic even grander than Mjolnir itself. When the teleportation process ends, Bill finds himself in a completely unknown place, as expected. But suddenly he hears a girl's desperate scream for help. Turning around, he sees a young woman being chased by a bear and notices they are heading straight for him. The scene takes him by surprise, and as he watches, the terrified girl cries out for help. Without hesitation, Bill strikes the bear's head with Mjolnir, eliminating it instantly. With the danger eliminated, he quickly scans his surroundings and wonders where he has ended up. Perhaps a forest near the kingdom, but he decides to put that aside for now and focuses on the girl. As he approaches to see if she's okay, he's surprised to discover she's a beast girl who has lost a leg. Asking her again if she's all right, he notices a collar around her neck. She quickly tries to hide it, but Bill realizes she was a slave, probably owned by a merchant who was also attacked by the bear. She then murmurs that it hurts, and when Bill approaches to assess her wound, the young woman begins to scream in terror. Seeing her panic, he stops immediately and speaks to her gently, asking her not to move. Recognizing her fear, he decides to calm her down first, so he activates his golden hand ability and brings the divine hammer towards her. Although she hesitates at first, the girl begins to calm down as she feels the gentle aura emitting from the hammer. Now that she's more relaxed, Bill assures her he has no intention of harming her. He then raises the hammer and activates the full restoration ability, letting it fall gently on her thigh where the leg is missing. The girl cries out in pain as her limb begins to regenerate, her wounds healing rapidly until, in a matter of seconds, her entire leg is restored as if nothing had happened. Astonished, she asks him what he did, and Bill explains that he used his hammer to activate an ability called Full Restoration, which repairs damaged body parts. He then tells her to stay still because he's going to use another ability, while she watches him in bewilderment. Bill suddenly strikes the collar with his hammer, activating the disassemble ability. The object glows brightly and then vanishes without a trace. Bill then tells her that she is now truly free, because if she had tried to remove the collar herself, her head would have exploded. Hearing this, a shiver runs down her spine, and just as she seems about to say something, without warning, the girl hugs him tightly and introduces herself as Pori, thanking him for saving her life and calling him Big Brother. Bill smiles and tells her it's no problem, introducing himself as well. Putting that aside, and since it's getting dark, he decides to set up camp and asks her to wait a moment. He then walks over to a tree, causing Pori to tilt her head in curiosity. He examines it carefully and determines that this one will do. He then strikes the trunk with his hammer, using the transmute wood to cabin ability. The tree begins to warp and take another shape as Bill watches with a smile. As the transformation completes, Pori is dumbfounded and asks in surprise what on earth just happened, as the tree is turned into a house. Bill, very casually, replies that this will be their lodging for the night. Meanwhile, on the border of the kingdom of Jeniga, some knights arrive on the scene and discover the corpses of numerous ancient dragons. Perplexed, they wonder who could have accomplished such a feat, when suddenly one of them spots a figure leaping over the pile of bodies. Squinting to get a better look, his eyes widen and he shouts that it's the heroine of the sacred ice sword, Lady Carolina Isabel. All the knights quickly bow in respect, and one of them asks if she really defeated all the dragons by herself. Another replies that Lady Carolina is more than capable of such feats, adding that the city's protective barrier alone wouldn't have been enough to save them, and that for the sake of the kingdom's peace, her strength is absolutely essential. Changing the subject, a knight respectfully asks her to accompany them to the royal palace, but Carolina ignores him, silently observing her sword, which confuses everyone. She then comments that her blade seems to have some wear. The knight tries to say that even a sacred sword can deteriorate, but he stops mid-sentence and blushes upon seeing the always cold and serene Carolina smile. Then she covers herself with her hood, and muttering, "So that's how it is," she disappears in the blink of an eye. Surprising everyone present, Carolina seems to have teleported to the royal capital of the Gaedenerga kingdom. And as she walks, humming, her sword begins to glow and transforms into a spirit cat that comments, "She seems to be in a good mood today." Brushing its tail against her face, it asks if she's so excited because she's going to see her beloved Blacksmith prince. She nods, confirming that she will finally see Bill again. The cat says it loves Bill too, as no one else maintains it with such care or treats it so gently. Getting back on topic, the cat complains annoyedly because Bill told her the sword wouldn't ship unless she faced 100 ancient dragons. So Carolina wiped out an entire horde just to push it to its limit and have an excuse to see him again, which the cat considers completely absurd. Carolina replies that she is only there because he is. Finally, upon arriving in front of the workshop, Carolina uses magic to conjure a mirror and check her face while the cat rings the bell. Second opens the door and upon seeing her, calls her beautiful and tries to invite her in. Carolina was very excited to see Bill, but the moment she sees Second, her enthusiasm vanishes completely. Noticing the coldness in her expression, Second quickly recognizes her and greets her properly. She asks where Bill is, and Second replies that he's not there, assuming he went out to get something. Carolina says she'll wait, but then Second informs her that Bill has been fired and that from now on, he is the new owner of the workshop. Hearing this, Carolina glares at him, releasing a threatening aura while Second trembles, wondering if this has something to do with Bill. Carolina, visibly annoyed that this guy has kicked Bill out, points her sword at him and demands to know where he is, as she needs him to repair her sacred sword. Second, assuming she's just upset because Bill isn't there to fix it, seizes the opportunity and offers to handle the maintenance himself in place of his brother. Carolina observes him carefully and asks if he's really suggesting something so absurd. At that moment, it's revealed that only Carolina and Bill are able to see the spirit of the sacred sword, the cat. Although it wonders if maybe Second also has potential. After all, he is his brother. However, Second arrogantly insists that he can handle it, and even claims to be much better than Bill. Carolina, not believing him one bit, hands him a sword and asks if he really thinks he can do his brother's job. He responds with confidence, telling her to leave everything in his hands and convinced that once she sees his skill, she will choose him instead. He firmly believes that Bill only seems special because he was born first, nothing more. With that idea, he begins to work on the sword and thinks that this is his perfect opportunity to take away everything his brother values. He refuses to accept that he can't do the same as him. And with that stubbornness, he begins to sharpen the blade carelessly, which causes immense pain to the sword spirit. Since he can't see it, he continues to clumsily wear down the blade, while the spirit cat becomes increasingly enraged, trying to stop him. Unable to bear it any longer, the spirit unleashes a murderous aura, and its face takes on a monstrous form. Terrified, Second feels his arm is about to break from the pressure. Just then, Carolina extends her hand, and the sword immediately flies to her, surprised at how easy it was to anger the sword. The cat explains that Second didn't even try to listen to its voice. He just did what he wanted, completely different from his brother, who always understood that even tools have feelings and treated them with respect. Hearing this, Second looks confused and asks what nonsense they're talking about, claiming that swords can't get angry. At that, the cat concludes that this guy is just hopeless trash. Carolina then explains that the sacred sword has a will of its own and that Bill always took perfect care of it, but now that he's gone, she will never return to the workshop. Before leaving, she informs him with a severe look that both she and the sword have seen his true ability and that he is light years away from his brother. As she turns to leave, Second begs her to stop, but she continues walking without looking back. At that moment, Seer returns to the workshop and sees Carolina leaving. Confused by her presence, she stops in surprise as Second shouts from inside, pleading for another chance, then collapses to the floor, insisting through sobs that he is better than his brother, leaving Seer even more bewildered. Her confusion quickly turns to horror as she sees the chaotic state of the workshop and asks Second with a mix of rage and surprise what on earth happened here. In a trembling voice, he informs her that he somehow angered Lady Carolina, who said she would never return to the workshop. He tries to reassure her, saying that even if the heroine doesn't come back, there will always be other customers. But that only infuriates her more, and she yells, asking if he's an idiot. She reminds him that if Carolina hates them, it's as if the entire kingdom hates them too, which means they're finished. Overwhelmed, Second yells at her to shut up, and she responds by demanding that he stop yelling and start cleaning up the mess immediately. Just then, a man appears at the workshop entrance and addresses Seer as president, informing her that the royal family has canceled their order. Still engrossed in the argument, she absent-mindedly replies that she already knows and orders him to leave. But the moment hangs in the air as both she and Second freeze and slowly look at each other, confused, before asking in unison, "Who canceled the orders?" Meanwhile, in the jungle, in the treehouse Bill has built, Pori is amazed to see it include a hot tub, delicious food, comfortable clothes, and a soft mattress. Impressed by it all, she asks Bill if he's some kind of wizard. He laughs and replies no, he simply used one of his abilities to grant protection to the house. Then he used supreme alchemy to create food directly from ingredients. Pori, astonished, finds his abilities incredible and tells him he's amazing. This sincerely touches Bill, as he has been working to exhaustion lately, and it feels good to finally be appreciated. He even remembers how Seer manipulated him into believing it was completely normal for a blacksmith to forge 9,999 A-grade swords a day. Moving past that, Pori tells him she thinks he's a great person, which takes him by surprise. Thinking it over, he reflects on how his grandfather was an extraordinary genius who created one miraculous work after another, while his father, though not as talented, was always diligent, careful, and willing to help others. Bill considers them to be the true geniuses. He, on the other hand, sees himself as a common blacksmith who learned a few tricks and simply wants to make people smile. As he looks up to continue talking, he realizes Pori has already fallen asleep, which makes him feel a little embarrassed as he mutters, wondering how she could fall asleep mid-conversation. Still, he's glad she feels comfortable enough to rest. She must have been really exhausted to fall asleep so quickly. With a gentle smile, he decides to lie down as well, and so the two spend the night in that dangerous jungle. At dawn, Bill wakes up, yawns, and greets Pori with a casual "good morning," but getting no response, he assumes she's still asleep and approaches her bed to wake her. He is completely stunned to see an older, unknown, but beautiful girl lying in her place. Confused, he wonders who this woman is. But upon noticing the ears and tail, a wild and impossible idea crosses his mind. Before he can understand what's happening, the girl opens her eyes, smiles cheerfully, and calls him Big Brother, just as Pori did. Shocked, Bill realizes it really is her, and quickly asks how she changed so drastically. Pori, looking at her own body, replies that it seems she has gone through an evolution. Shortly after, as they leave the treehouse, Bill asks her to slow down, as she's going too fast. She stops and thanks him for the clothes he made her, saying they are very comfortable to move in. Intrigued, Bill asks what she means by evolution. Pori explains that when a monster absorbs enough mana, it can evolve into a higher-ranked species. Since she has monster blood from being a beast folk, she can also evolve. Apparently, the food Bill prepared the night before was loaded with mana, and that triggered her transformation. Putting that aside, Bill asks if she plans to follow him, and she replies with another question, if her presence bothers him. He quickly assures her that's not the case. And Pori, with a slightly flushed face, lights up and tells him she has nowhere else to go, and besides, she wants to stay by his side. Seeing this new side of her, Bill realizes that it's not just her appearance that has changed. Then, out of nowhere, Pori whispers to him that they could also make some kittens, which takes him completely by surprise. Overwhelmed and blushing, Bill runs off yelling that he's not ready to be a father yet, while Pori chases after him, asking him to stop. The comical moment is cut short when Bill stops dead in his tracks, feeling water under his feet. This puzzles them both, as a village was supposed to be there, but all they see is flooded land like a swamp. Looking around, Bill sees a sign pointing forward with the words "Dead End," a rather ominous name for a village. Following the indicated direction, they advance through the swamp until they reach a lake and the end of the road, finding themselves in the center of the village. And Bill wonders what happened to the town. At that moment, Pori notices some people nearby and suggests they ask them. They approach a man who introduces himself as the village chief, Arthur. He explains that the village of Dead End is currently underwater due to heavy rains over the last few days. With nowhere else to go, the villagers are waiting for the water to recede so they can rebuild. To make matters worse, there are no young people left in the village to help with the recovery, and even if there were, the water level is overwhelming. Hearing all this, Bill decides to help them, and without much explanation, he walks towards the forest while Pori asks where he's going. Bill then climbs to a high point and scans the area. He replies that, just as he suspected, the mountains surround the village in a way that creates a natural basin, which explains why it floods so easily. Still, he thinks he can fix it. With a clear idea of what needs to be done, he takes his hammer and activates his golden arm ability, ordering Mjolnir to increase in size. As it obeys, the hammer becomes gigantic, leaving everyone present speechless. Using all his strength, Bill slams it into the ground, causing a powerful shockwave as a cloud of dust rises into the air and a huge crater forms under the impact. He then slightly reduces the hammer size and strikes it against one side of the crater. The impact cracks the edge, and soon, the water that flooded the village begins to flow into the crater, forming a huge reservoir. The villagers and Pori watch in amazement as the water drains quickly, and in a matter of moments, the village is completely dry. Seeing the devastation left by the flood, the villagers feel devastated. But Bill calmly explains that wooden houses, especially old ones, are easily damaged after prolonged exposure to water. He then opens a storage box from which dozens of stones float out. This confuses the village chief, who asks what he plans to do with them. Without answering, Bill activates his golden arm again and strikes the ground while invoking his total restoration and creation ability. Instantly, the damaged wooden structures begin to restore themselves, and the floating stones transform into bricks that assemble themselves into solid, improved walls. Thus, in the blink of an eye, the village is completely rebuilt, now more resilient and advanced. The villagers burst into cheers and run to admire the improvements. Impressed by the construction, the village chief asks Bill if he is a great wizard. Shortly after, Bill and Pori are invited to the chief's house, where all the villagers bow in gratitude. Bill humbly tells them it's not necessary, explaining that thanks to the golden arm ability, the work was simple. Nevertheless, the chief insists on rewarding him, saying they won't be at peace if they don't. Bill, unsure of what to ask for, finally asks if the village possesses any unusual tools or weapons. The villagers look puzzled, but they lead him to a shrine where a sealed sword is found. As he approaches, he immediately feels its ominous presence and recognizes it as a demon sword. The village chief explains that a long time ago, a hero used that sword to defeat an evil god and save the village, but later lost his sanity for fear of the sword's curse. That's why their ancestors sealed it in a shrine. Holding the sword, Bill comments that he never would have expected to find such a dangerous weapon hidden here. Alarmed, the chief asks if he's really okay, explaining that even touching that sword is unbearable for them. But Bill reassures him, saying he's fine, and asks Pori to wait outside with the chief. Pori refuses, saying she can't protect him if she stays outside. Accepting this, Bill decides to get this over with quickly. He then takes out his hammer, at which point the chief warns him that the sword was also wielded by a very powerful witch. Undeterred, Bill activates his decomposition ability and strikes the sword with the hammer, causing the seal, made of glowing beads, to break instantly. The chief watches, paralyzed. Bill quickly unsheathes the rusted and blood-stained sword, and holding it carefully, he speaks to it in a gentle tone, saying it must have been painful to be abandoned, sealed, and left to rot under layers of rust and blood for so long. Confused, the chief asks who he's talking to which Bill calmly replies that if you think from the sword's perspective, you can also hear its voice. Suddenly, a dark aura begins to emanate from the blade, and, seeing it, Pori tries to run to Bill, but the chief stops her, warning her not to get too close. At that moment, Bill senses something sinister, understanding that the sword's curse seeks to drive its wielder mad. The aura takes the form of a spirit radiating a threatening presence, leaving Bill surprised as he asks, "What the hell is this?" However, it seems only he can see the spirit. Pori, confused, asks what's happening, while the chief, with complete serenity, asks if he's seeing the spirit of the sword. He then explains to Pori that some people have the ability to see the spirits sealed within swords, and this particular one contains a demonic spirit. Bill, observing it, firmly believes that the curse in this sword represents pure evil, as tools are meant to serve those who wield them. But this sword is cursed to reject all who try to use it. At this, the village chief suggests he let it go, arguing that it's becoming too dangerous. However, Bill flatly refuses, as he feels a deep compassion for the weapon, shunned, sealed, and feared as a bringer of madness. Even now, he can hear its voice, painfully pleading to be saved. He then activates his golden hand ability and declares with determination that he is a blacksmith, and his duty is to repair tools. Therefore, he vows to fix the sword and gives it a name, Yzora. With his divine refinement ability activated, he begins to hammer the blade, causing a beam of aura to shoot into the sky. Meanwhile, in the capital of the Genegra Kingdom, Carolina continues her unsuccessful search for Bill. Suddenly, the sword spirit accompanying her senses something and turns sharply. Carolina notices and asks what's wrong, calling him Corey. Corey, staring at the distant pillar of light, replies that a new sacred sword has been born. At that same instant, back in the village, when Bill finishes hammering, the cursed sword begins to shine brightly, and its appearance transforms into an elegant katana. Simultaneously, the sword spirit, now named Yuzora, also changes and takes the form of a woman in a Shinto priestess outfit. When Bill extends his hand to take the katana, Yuzora greets him, first calling him Master Blacksmith, but then corrects herself and calls him her creator. Bill gently asks if she still feels pain, to which Yuzora smiles and assures him she doesn't. Then, she introduces herself as the spirit of the sacred sword of darkness, Yuzora, and sincerely thanks him for giving her a name. Bill is stunned to hear this, as he hadn't realized she was a sacred sword. Yuzora explains that thanks to him, she has been reborn as a sacred sword from a demon's sword. Meanwhile, the village chief is still confused, as he cannot see Yuzora. But Pori, on the other hand, can now see her clearly and whispers in awe how beautiful she is. Hearing that comment, Yuzora, surprised, turns to Pori and asks if she can really see her. At that moment, Bill suddenly throws the katana to Pori. This startles her. She barely manages to catch it, and still surprised, asks if only heroes are supposed to wield sacred swords. However, before she can say anything more, her eyes widen in amazement as she feels something activate within her. Without being fully aware of it, she unsheathes the katana and begins to execute a wide range of sword techniques with surprising grace and precision. Finally, when she sheathes the blade, she comes out of her trance, convinced that the katana itself guided her movements naturally. Bill then tells her that she should keep the sword, as everything happened thanks to the inspiration she gave him that very morning. Pori, still surprised, asks if that was really the case. Bill confirms it, explaining that she fed the sacred sword with mana, which allowed it to evolve, just as she herself did. Yuzora, now fully awakened as a sword spirit, marvels at the discovery that even weapons can evolve, and finds Bill incredibly impressive for making it happen. Subsequently, Bill explains that his grandfather once told him that blacksmiths from the Far East engrave their names on the blades they forge. So when he gave the katana a name, he also infused it with the power of the golden hand, causing it to evolve into a sacred sword. The village chief is shocked by this revelation, as sacred swords are normally only granted to the world when an apostle of God descends. Therefore, a human forging one is something unprecedented. Hearing all this, Bill remembers that his grandfather always regretted not being able to forge a sacred sword himself. For that reason, Bill feels divided, proud, but also burdened with the weight of knowing he didn't create this sword from scratch, but simply completed what someone else had started. Nevertheless, seeing Yuzora happy makes it all worthwhile. He just hopes that one day he can forge a divine relic entirely on his own. Meanwhile, in a distant place, Carolina's sword spirit, Corey, notices the mana beam from the newborn sacred sword. Amazed, he recognizes that it did not descend from the sky, but was born in this world, which can only mean one thing. A human has created a sacred sword. Carolina is also shocked, but quickly begins to piece things together in her mind, and then unexpectedly starts to laugh, which bewilders Corey. When he asks why she's laughing, Carolina responds with another question, wanting to know if the spirit hasn't figured it out yet. Seeing her reaction, a surprised Corey asks if it was Bill, and Carolina firmly confirms it, adding that with this, the world will finally recognize his skill. However, her expression changes immediately as she realizes something important. And without wasting any more time, she leaps from that high place and orders Corey to locate the new sacred sword immediately. Moments later, Bill and Pori leave the village in a cart, with Pori driving. Bill examines a map and discovers that the village of Dead End is at the very edge of the kingdom. So he decides their next destination will be the Majua Empire, as it's a place where he isn't well known. Pori, hearing this, expresses how happy she is that they got the cart, to which Bill replies that the villagers themselves gave it to them as a sign of gratitude, and he couldn't refuse their gesture. He then tells her with complete seriousness that he is entrusting her with a sacred sword of darkness, which surprises Pori. She asks if he really wants her to use it, to which he replies yes, affirming that it suits her perfectly. And that's why he asks her to take care of Yuzora and use her to protect others. Yuzora, sitting on top of the cart, comments that the wind feels amazing and that being outdoors makes her feel truly alive. As a gesture of gratitude, she decides to teach Pori swordsmanship, who is surprised to learn she's going to learn sword techniques. However, just then, the wind suddenly intensifies, and they both see something flying in their direction. It's a dragon, which lands with a thud in front of them. Seeing it, Bill is shocked to recognize it as a green dragon. The dragon quickly takes flight again and goes to attack. Bill realizes it's preparing an aerial attack. However, instead of worrying, he watches it with fascination, as its scales are ideal materials for making armor. Hearing that, Yuzora comments ironically that her creator seems to see the monster solely as living material, and then suggests they leave the dragon to Pori, adding that it will also be good training for her. Bill confirms it, saying it sounds like a great idea, as he also wants to see Yuzora's abilities in action. The dragon turns in air and dives towards them. Yuzora tells Pori to get ready, and they both jump towards the dragon, which begins to gather fire in its mouth, ready to unleash it, while Bill watches from below. Pori nervously unsheathes the sword with her eyes closed, and lunges toward the dragon's neck, believing she has landed a critical hit. Excited, she calls out to Bill to see what she's done. But at that moment, she realizes it's not enough. The wound wasn't deep enough. Worse yet, the dragon turns around and charges at them again, its mouth full of fire. Floating in the air thanks to Yuzora's power, Pori begins to panic, not knowing what to do. Then, Yuzora speaks to her gently, telling her to calm down. And guiding her hands on the sword, she explains that she must trust the blade, as it, in turn, will connect with her heart. She asks her to open her eyes and listen carefully, because even in the midst of darkness and despair, she must hold on to the slightest glimmer of hope. With Yuzora's words clearing her mind, Pori opens her eyes and can immediately see the exact point where she must strike, as Yuzora whispers that she will be by her side. In that instant, the dragon unleashes a blast of flame at them. But a determined Pori lunges directly through the fire, and with a clean and precise cut, she slices off the dragon's head. Both she and the dragon's body fall to the ground, but Pori manages to land without injury. Filled with joy, she runs to Bill shouting that she finally did it. Bill smiles and tells her she did a good job, although Yuzora points out that Pori couldn't even use 1% of her true strength and failed to kill the dragon in a single blow. At that, Pori's smile fades as she understands that despite Yuzora's guidance, she is still just a beginner with the sword. Nevertheless, Bill pats her on the head and tells her it wasn't bad at all for a first fight. He then turns to Yuzora to ask her opinion. She simply nods, which makes Pori smile enthusiastically again. Meanwhile, deep in the jungle, Corey tells Carolina to slow down, arguing that there's no reason to rush. But Carolina replies, explaining that a single sacred sword is powerful enough to bring an entire nation to its knees. Then, she adds that if other countries discover the truth about Bill's existence, she asks firmly, "What do you think will happen?" Corey is stunned, realizing that the unbridled greed of governments could easily spark a war over Bill. Carolina reveals that she plans to propose to him before anyone else does. Surprised by such a declaration, a bewildered Corey asks if she's serious, and if so, why now of all times? Embarrassed and somewhat flustered, Carolina explains that once people find out Bill is a divine blacksmith capable of forging a sacred sword, women from all corners of the world will start proposing to him in droves, and she flatly refuses to allow that to happen. Urgently, she asks Corey how far away the sacred sword is. Corey replies that the sacred sword is near the village of Dead End, on the edge of the kingdom, but dangerously close to the border of the Majua Empire. This leaves Carolina completely shocked, because in the Majua Empire resides that person, the heroine. Meanwhile, Bill and the others are startled by a sudden clap of thunder. Looking up, they see dark clouds gathering, sparking with lightning. Just as Pori asks what's happening, a powerful bolt of lightning strikes in front of them, creating a blinding flash. At that moment, a wary Bill immediately suspects who might be behind this and wonders if it's really her. As the dust settles, a figure is revealed. A dark-skinned girl with an eye patch and a whip in her hand, surrounded by lightning, addresses Bill, calling him "my master," and declaring that she has finally found him. She then says it's been a long time since they last saw each other, repeating with conviction the title Master Bill. Faced with the strange situation, an alarmed and confused Pori demands to know who the hell this girl is and why she's calling him master. However, before getting an answer, the girl with the eye patch suddenly appears behind Pori, coldly mocking her by implying that a mere beast girl is not capable of protecting her master. She then prepares to strike while taunting Pori, asking if she can keep up. Pori reacts immediately, turning to counterattack, while Bill desperately shouts for them to stop. However, Before the girl with the eye patch can launch her attack, Pori moves first. To her surprise, the girl easily blocks the blow with her whip, leaving Pori stupefied to see that the whip is so sturdy her sword trembles upon impact. She wonders what kind of weapon it is. The girl smiles arrogantly and asks if she really thinks it's just a whip. She then begins to crack it, and as it sparks with electricity, she reveals that it's her partner, the sacred sword of lightning, named Thunderthorn. This leaves Pori in shock, discovering it's also a sacred sword. While this is happening, Carolina is still paralyzed in the spot where she had stopped, until Corey updates her, informing her that the sacred sword of lightning has made contact with Bill. He explains that in the entire world, there are only 6 sacred swords, each wielded by a woman known as a battle maiden. To which Carolina adds that the girl with the eye patch is one of them, and her name is Lakia, the heroine of lightning who wields the powerful Thunderthorn. Realizing that Lakia has made direct contact with Bill, Carolina breaks into a desperate run, yelling that if that witch tries to flirt with Bill, she'll kill her. Simultaneously, in the midst of combat, Lakia manages to wrap her whip around Pori's leg and secure a firm grip. She laughs as she comments that she caught her like a fish on a hook. Pori struggles to free her leg, striking the whip, but it's so resilient that her attack has no effect. Lakia mocks her further, saying that despite having a sacred sword, she can't even cut a whip. She then releases her with disdain, saying she doesn't usually mess with children. Immediately after, she begins to generate lightning from her whip and hurls it at Pori, telling her to leave this to the adults. Just as the lightning is about to strike her, completely defenseless in midair, Bill intervenes using his special ability, Supreme Refinement, Air Shield, deflecting the bolt, which ends up hitting a nearby mountain, completely obliterating it, leaving Yuzora utterly impressed. Once the immediate danger is resolved, Bill gently catches Pori as she falls, and apologizes, saying he shouldn't have let her face this situation alone, as her opponent is extremely strong. But Lakia gives no quarter and strikes the ground with her whip, firmly declaring that Pori is too weak, and for that reason, she cannot accept her as Bill's wife. Bill tries to clarify that Pori is not his fiancée or anything of the sort, although Lakia interrupts him, asking if he remembers their deal. If she won, he had to accept her as his wife. This leaves Pori completely stunned. Meanwhile, Bill asks Lakia if she always has to joke about things like that, but she responds with a serious and challenging tone, asking if it looks like she's joking. Without further ado, she begins to spin her whip in the air, declaring with determination that today she will surpass him. The dark clouds grow even denser, and the intensity of the lightning increases. This makes Yuzora realize that the situation is truly serious, as Lakia is not playing around. The heroine then warns Bill to prepare to witness her ultimate technique, the Draconic Storm, after which the thunder takes the form of a mythical dragon, a sacred dragon, and lunges at them. Facing this sight, Yuzora fears that if it hits, everything will be reduced to ashes. However, Bill remains calm, and stating he has no other choice, decides not to hold back. So he throws his divine hammer at the electric dragon, activating his supreme destruction ability at maximum power. It pierces through the beast effortlessly, pulverizing it, and the weapon returns to his hand. This leaves Lakia stupefied, as she never imagined he could so easily dispel a heroine's attack. As always, she considers him truly impressive. Once the situation has calmed down, Pori asks Bill who Lakia is, and he explains that she comes from the Empire, that she is the heroine of lightning and light, bearer of the evil eye. When Pori asks about said eye, Bill recounts that, as a child, Lakia was the victim of a disaster and was cursed with the eye of the death god, which causes any living being looked at by her right eye to perish, becoming a catastrophe for the Empire. Despite countless attempts, no one managed to cure her. So with no other alternatives, they sentenced her to death. But just then, they discovered she also wielded a sacred sword, and not being able to afford losing her, they postponed the execution while searching for someone capable of lifting the curse, until they finally found him. At that time, his power was not enough to eliminate the evil eye, so he could only seal it with a magical device. This is the reason she has come now, as she can't bear to remain locked in a dungeon any longer. She comes to the man who once saved her, because he is her only salvation and the one she loves. Although she doesn't wish to remain protected, but to become strong enough to defeat him. That's why, as soon as the sacred sword was forged, she knew without a doubt it was his work and ran here. Remembering how he created the sword, Bill gets an idea. He approaches her, And as Lakia says his name, confused, he asks her to remove the seal from her eye. This request startles her and worries Pori, who warns him he could die, while Yuzora asks what he's planning. Ignoring them, Bill looks at Lakia and asks if she trusts him with her life, to which she firmly replies yes, as her life has belonged to him since he took her hand and she gave it to him. After which, she tries to lift the eye patch, though she finds it difficult, so Bill gently stops her, saying it's all right. And with a quick tug, he removes it himself. He exposes the cursed eye in an ominous magic circle, full of flaws, which he instantly detects. He then activates his golden arm, uses the supreme refinement ability, and hammers the magic circle of the eye, generating shockwaves and clouds of dust so intense they shake the air. Until, upon finishing, Lakia's eye appears completely under control, with no dark aura or circle whatsoever. She simply looks at him with both eyes clear and open. But upon realizing, she looks away with concern and asks Bill if he's still alive, to which he replies that he's fine and still there. At that moment, Lakia senses that her eye is cured. Still, Pori remains alert as Lakia's right eye begins to glow. When no immediate effects occur, Yuzora wonders if the eye has become a divine relic. Bill confirms it, explaining that just as Yuzora was originally a demon sword, Lakia's eye was also a cursed object, so he applied the same principle. The cure was within the object itself. Although the cursed structure was complex, he could easily dismantle it and rebuild the missing parts, thus rebirthing the eye. Hearing this explanation, Lakia runs to Bill, calls him my love, and begs him to hit her with another ultimate technique, leaving him stunned as he asks if she really wants another one. As she jumps to sit on him, he tells her she's exaggerating. But at that instant, a drop of water falls on his face. Looking up, he sees that Lakia is crying with joy. Through tears, she tells him how incredible he is for breaking her curse and thanks him, to which he responds by acknowledging she has become stronger. But as soon as he admits it, she immediately tells him to marry her, though he flatly refuses. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Gainurga, at the Hapasai shop, Second uses a demonic-looking seal and presses it against a rusty, worn-out sword. The seal leaves a mark similar to the magic circle Lakia had on her demonic eye. And as the mark begins to glow, it transforms the old sword into a new, high-quality weapon. With a malicious smile, Second marvels at the power of the seal, as he can now craft all the fake tools he wants. He then turns to someone at the shop's entrance and thanks them. But that person replies that there's no need for thanks, and tells him to make good use of the cursed fake seal. Back with Bill, Lakia tells him that if she manages to defeat him now, he will belong to her, and that with her new divine eye, she's sure he won't be able to resist loving her. After saying that, she lunges at him, activating her eye to immobilize him. But Bill moves quickly, and she ends up falling on top of Pori, who is now completely immobilized. Surprised, Lakia asks why the technique worked on Pori but not on him, to which Bill replies that of course it wouldn't affect him, as he is the eye's original creator. Since he didn't want to die by his own creation, when he refined it, he incorporated a safety mechanism that made him immune. As Pori praises Bill for his genius, Lakia grabs her hair in frustration, lamenting that she lost her only chance to be with him. Later, they finally arrive at the Majua Empire. Inside the carriage, Lakia leans on Bill and tells him that although it's not the wedding announcement she had planned, she still wants to inform the Empress that he restored her eye. Hearing that, Bill asks how Her Majesty is doing, and Pori, driving the carriage, replies that he'll know soon, as they've arrived in the city. Arriving at the imperial capital, the city of Carter, protected by a barrier dome. Bill, seeing the city, comments that every time he sees it, it seems impressive as the barrier stretches across the entire sky. Then Pori asks him what he's talking about, and Bill points to the barrier and asks if they don't see it covering the whole city. Yuzora explains that what he's seeing is the barrier that protects the city, and that normally humans cannot perceive it. But if he can see it, it means his skills as a craftsman have improved remarkably. Realizing this, Bill understands that even his perception has sharpened. Although he had previously done maintenance on the barrier device in the kingdom of Jittanurga, this is the first time he's been able to see it directly. Later, Lakia takes him to the imperial palace, where an old woman is sitting on a chaise lounge. Lakia greets her as Your Majesty and reports her return. Pori is surprised to discover that the leader of the empire is a woman. But Lakia explains that the empire values strength above all else, regardless of gender. She recounts that when the empire faced a catastrophe, Her Majesty Artemis personally led a private army to protect the nation, thus earning the empire's recognition. Then Empress Artemis greets Bill, saying it's been a long time, and he replies with a bow, saying it feels like a lifetime has passed. This exchange stuns Pori, who asks if they know each other. Lakia explains that it was Empress Artemis who first asked Bill to lift her curse. Artemis thanks Bill for coming to Lakia's aid once more and apologizes for not being in good health, which leads Pori to ask if she is sick. Lakia confirms that Her Majesty's lungs are damaged, causing her a terrible cough. She further explains that not even the Empire's best medical technology has been able to cure her. When Artemis states that she doesn't have much time left, Bill replies that won't happen, as he firmly believes she is strong and will recover. But Artemis gently denies it, saying it can't be helped, that her body is falling apart, and that even the doctors have said she has little time left. Nevertheless, putting that aside, she says she can now be at peace after having the chance to thank him before the end. At that moment, Bill tells her he has a request to make, and she tells him to speak freely, as he is the savior of the heroine and the Empire. With her permission, he asks her to allow him to heal her damaged body. This leaves her completely surprised, as she replies that even the saints have said her condition has no cure. Furthermore, she reminds him that he is a blacksmith and should understand that there is a big difference between objects and people. Bill admits that while his ability can heal wounds and restore lost parts, curing an illness is beyond his capabilities. However, since she described her situation as a body that is falling apart and not an illness, he asks her to let him repair it as if it were something broken. At this, Lakia intervenes, saying that Bill is truly extraordinary, almost on a divine level, and that it's definitely worth a try. So finally Artemis agrees, placing her trust in him for having helped Lakia before. With consent given, Bill activates his golden arm along with a total restoration ability and strikes the Empress's chest with his hammer. The restoration takes effect immediately. Her body begins to glow and floats as it becomes completely enveloped by a radiant aura that looks like a sphere of light. Both Lakia and Pori watch in amazement as the light shines with 7 combined colors. But suddenly a man bursts into the room, rushing in to inform the Empress of an emergency. Though upon seeing the scene, he puts his hand on his sword, demanding to know what they've done to Her Majesty. At that moment, Lakia quickly steps forward and calls him General Adrak, explaining that these people are the Empress's guests and she is currently receiving treatment. She then asks what the emergency is. Adrak reports that the barrier device has failed, and to make matters worse, hordes of demonic insects are heading straight for the Imperial capital. This leaves everyone shocked while Bill silently observes the situation. Stepping out onto the balcony, everyone can see the immense swarm of insectoid monsters approaching. Fortunately, all citizens have been evacuated inside the Imperial Palace. But even the palace won't withstand such a number of enemies, making the scene look like a nightmare. Lakia then immediately orders Adrak to help evacuate the citizens while she deals with the monsters, but he stops her, saying she can't, as the demonic insects are already attacking people through the broken barrier. She then orders him to repair the barrier, but he replies that the responsible engineers are currently outside the Empire, which makes the situation seem desperate. At that moment, Bill steps forward saying he will repair the barrier himself, and walks to the edge of the balcony, while Adrak tries to stop him, asking what he intends to do. Bill then activates his golden arm, and the sudden light makes Adrak step back in surprise. Analyzing the barrier, Bill notices a magic circle at its center, one that seems familiar to the one he saw on Lakia's cursed eye. Just as he leaps towards the circle, the barrier begins to collapse completely, and one of the monstrous insects almost manages to break through, followed by more. But before they can enter, Bill strikes the barrier with his supreme refinement ability, which causes an intense glow that restores it completely, immediately, leaving everyone speechless. Bill lands safely on the ground, confident that with the barrier's intense light, the insects won't last long. And, just as he predicted, the monsters begin to disintegrate, which leaves Adrak completely stunned. Bill calmly explained that he had improved the barrier, making it self-sufficient and capable of disintegrating any monster that came into contact with it. He also mentioned that the layer he had repaired showed clear signs of being damaged from the inside. Hearing this, Adrak reacted sharply, accusing him of lying and stating that no one could actually see the barrier. Paying no attention to the interruption, Bill continued his reasoning and argued that natural degradation would not have caused a total collapse, which made it clear that someone had sabotaged the structure. At that moment, he pointed out the obvious sweat on Adrak's face, a detail that was especially suspicious considering he had never directly accused him. Suddenly, A voice resonated from the palace hall, saying, "How brazen." All present turned their eyes towards the source of the sound, and before them appeared Artemis, an unexpected figure. Her appearance was so rejuvenated that not even Bill recognized her immediately. Seeing the crown on her head, Adrak demanded to know the whereabouts of the Empress. Artemis, unperturbed, responded by asking if he hadn't understood yet, and solemnly declared that she was Empress Artemis, rightful ruler of the empire. This revelation left Pori and Lakia completely paralyzed, while Bill remained bewildered. One of the knights in the hall asked what had happened to her body. Artemis explained that her recovery was thanks to Bill, and that the rejuvenation was likely a side effect of the process. After hearing her words, Bill understood that Artemis's cells had not only been healed, but had also been largely replaced with completely new tissue. The people witnessing the scene began to cheer, seeing the transformation as a miracle, and chanted in unison, "Long live Her Majesty Artemis." Amidst that popular exaltation, Artemis ordered the capture of General Adrak and his immediate transfer to the dungeon. However, when the knights tried to seize him, Adrak broke free violently, and tearing off his uniform, he revealed a set of explosives strapped to his body. With a defiant cry, he exclaimed, "Glory to the Seven Powers," attempting to activate the charge. Before he could succeed, Artemis lunged with great force at him, delivering a kick that sent him flying through the air. As his body soared across the hall, the Empress proclaimed that anyone who tried to harm the Empire would find no mercy under her rule. It was then that Adraka's body exploded in mid-flight, marking his end. The crowd responded with a unanimous ovation, fervently shouting, "Long live Her Majesty Artemis." With the threat eliminated, Artemis turned to Bill and asked how she could reward such kindness. He replied calmly that her smile was reward enough. Artemis, blushing slightly, gave him a sincere smile. Pori, watching the scene, was speechless. She commented quietly that Bill seemed to be very popular. Lakia nodded and mentioned that Artemis did not yet have a husband. Surprised, Pori asked if that made her another rival, and Lakia confirmed it, adding that they would have to face her together. Pori did not hesitate to accept the challenge. Setting aside the personal conversation, Bill turned his attention to Adraka's last words. He still didn't understand what he meant by the Seven Powers, or who was part of them. As those questions silently accompanied him, the world was left in the dark. In the capital of the Galanga Kingdom, inside the Hassan Company building, Seer screamed in frustration. Ever since the royal family had broken all ties with her, the nobles had also distanced themselves. And the situation was now so critical that if she lost just one more major client, her company would collapse without remedy. As she's lost in thought, someone knocks on the door, and angrily, she yells, asking who it is and why they're bothering her. Then the door opens, and standing before her is a woman who leaves Seer paralyzed, as it is none other than the guild master herself. Immediately, Seer apologizes for her earlier behavior, inwardly wondering why an S-rank master from the Adventurers Guild is visiting her. But the guild master brushes it off, saying it's no problem and expressing her sincere gratitude for the magnificent sword she acquired the other day. Hearing that, Seer remembers it was one of Bill's creations and proudly declares it's an honor to have been of service. The guild master continued, explaining that she was so impressed by the sword's quality that she decided to place an order for 50 more for the guild. She magically summons a box full of swords and kicks it open, taking one out. Seeing this, Seer smiles with satisfaction and comments that they poured their heart and soul into forging them, and asks if the swords meet her expectations. The guild leader holds up one of the swords, admiring its beauty, but then points out that its edge seems wrong. She then throws the sword into the air, draws her own weapon, also forged by Bill, and uses it to slice the other sword in two in mid-air, cutting it cleanly. Seer gasps, falls to the floor, and watches in horror as the broken pieces fall beside her, emanating a dark aura, revealing that it was actually a rusty, low-quality fake. The guild master narrows her eyes and declares that although the sword appears to be A-grade, it's actually a complete counterfeit. Paralyzed, Seer can't believe what she's hearing. With a stern expression, the master states that this kind of negligence has endangered the lives of her subordinates. Therefore, she will be filing a lawsuit against the Hassan Company for fraud. Horrified, Seer bursts into tears and clings to the guild master's leg, begging for mercy, assuring her that if they are sued, they will be finished, and swears something like this will never happen again. Although the guild master never imagined things would come to this, she resigns herself to the fact that the Hassan Company is doomed. And turning to leave, she tells Seer they'll see each other in court. Desperate, Seer begs her to wait, But the master doesn't stop. Meanwhile, at the Hoppusai smithy, Sekin continues to forge fake swords, finding it incredibly convenient that by simply stamping a fake seal on a low-quality blade, it looks like a valuable weapon. Convinced of his strategy, he believes he can buy junk swords, mark them with the seal, and sell them at absurd prices. However, his thoughts are abruptly interrupted when Seer storms into the place and throws the broken sword in front of him, demanding an immediate explanation. Startled, Sekin asks her what she's talking about and instantly recognizes the sword as one of his own, hearing him mutter to himself. Seer suspects that all the swords he's been making are fakes and asks him directly. She then informs him that due to his stupidity, they are now being sued by the entire Adventurers Guild. Sekin tries to downplay the issue, saying they can just sell more and generate even greater profits, and adds cynically that nowadays people care more about appearance than quality. Filled with fury, Seer asks if he has lost his mind. Questioning if quality no longer means anything to him as long as the product sells, she calls his actions an insult to all blacksmiths in the world. In an attempt to make him see reason, she warns him that continuing to take shortcuts will cause all their customers to abandon them. And finally, in disbelief, she asks if he has crap for brains. She then challenges him directly, telling him that if he truly believes he's better than Bill, then he just has to forge a single A-grade sword. Just one. But seeing him hesitate to answer, Seer understands the truth. He can't do it. Despite all his arrogance and empty talk, he has nothing to show for it, and because of him, they're about to lose everything. In that instant, she finally sees what she had ignored all this time. Bill was the heart of the Hassan Company. His skill was what kept them afloat, and his mastery was what made their products sell. Irritated even by the mention of Bill's name, Sekin explodes, asking if she wants him to depend on that guy again. And just as he's about to boast that he's better than him, he looks at the seal he's holding in his hand and declares, arrogantly, that with it, he can turn trash into priceless relics. Seeing him act this way, Seer realizes how pathetic he has become, someone who relies on fakes that are worth absolutely nothing. And then a vivid image of Bill appears in her mind, which leads her to wonder how she could have been so foolish. As she turns to leave, Sekin tries to stop her by grabbing her hand. But she slaps him and tells him that's enough, it's over. Looking him directly in the eyes, she tells him bluntly that Bill is far more capable than he will ever be. With that, she walks away, leaving Sekin completely devastated. He collapses to the floor, repeating Bill's name over and over again, each time with more bitterness, until a dark aura begins to emanate from his body, fueled by his rage. And as he growls that Bill always gets the credit, something inside him breaks. Possessed by a deep hatred, he curses Bill as the dark energy intensifies, and finally envelopes the entire smithy in a sinister gloom. In the distance, the person who gave him the seal watches the scene unfold, with a malevolent smile curving on their face. At that moment, Bill was holding a map in his hands when Pori called his name and informed him that this was the territory of Dylori, granted by Queen Artemis. Although Bill considered gratitude unnecessary, the Empress had decided to thank him for having saved the Empire on 3 occasions. Then, Pori asked if he would use the name Bill's Craftery, but he thought it was too long and proposed simply calling it Bill's. He was also glad to know that there were mines in the territory. Apparently, people would soon be sent to manage them. Bill commented that he would like to have his own workshop. Shortly after, Pori pointed to the side and asked about a nearby village. Upon arriving, they noted with strangeness that there wasn't a soul in the place. However, they suddenly heard a heartbreaking and violent scream. They saw a terrified girl running aimlessly. The girl tripped and fell to the ground, while a huge lizard loomed threateningly behind her. Immediately, a grate appeared between them, protecting her. The girl screamed desperately that Erica had disappeared. The lizard's claw failed to reach her, thanks to Bill having created the protective grate with his hammer. Without wasting time, Pori ran to help her. The girl gravely exclaimed that she wouldn't forgive those who harm other girls. It was then that other young women stood in front of the grate, asking them to stop and not to kill their grandfather. Amid the confusion, Bill and Pori didn't understand what was happening, until Pori pointed at Bill and introduced him. The girl, still doubtful, asked if this man was the new lord of the territory. At that moment, the inhabitants began to come out of their houses, knelt, and began to plead for help. Later, the entire village gathered in the largest house. In a corner of the room was a cage, and inside it, a large lizard. The girl introduced herself as Noah and explained that the lizard was her grandfather, the village chief, whose name was Sabos. Both Pori and Bill were surprised to discover it was a man. Noah then unbuttoned her dress and showed lizard scales on her back. As she explained, she was a victim of the curse of the white dragon god, who resided in the mountain range of the same name. Intrigued, Bill asked about this deity, and Noah continued, relating that this god had been summoning the winds since ancient times. When a person was caught in those winds, they received a curse that transformed them into a dragon, and if the curse progressed, the affected person eventually became a lizard. As she spoke, Bill and Pori listened attentively. At that moment, Bill noticed a magic circle on the lizard's head. He stated his intention to try something. Without hesitation, he broke the grate that contained it, which caused fear among the people who didn't understand what was happening. Bill waved his hand and pronounced, "Golden Hand, activate." He then struck the lizard with his hammer and declared firmly that he would destroy and rebuild it. Then, before everyone's eyes, the lizard began to transform back into an old man. Noah ran excitedly to hug her grandfather, who expressed with relief that he had regained his human form. Noah explained that the new Lord had cured him. Faced with the situation, Pori asked everyone to form a line to be treated one by one, and Noah announced with joy that everyone had returned to their original form. Finally, Bill declared that his work there was done and left the house. Noah ran after him and asked where he was going, to which Bill replied that his next destination was the White Dragon. Thus they began their march towards the White Dragon mountain range. Amidst that mountainous landscape, a pipe protruded from the ground, emitting an incomprehensible sound. Bill and Pori decided to venture inside, discovering they were the walls of a castle with windows and columns, but everything was covered by a strange substance. Instead of air, there was a dense and poisoned atmosphere. Pori commented that if it weren't for the protective barrier Bill had created, they would both be in a sorry state. Bill, for his part, expressed that everything seemed very strange and that he had the impression that the source of the curses was not exactly from this place. Meanwhile, Pori crouched down to try to see the white dragon through the dense darkness. But suddenly the mound she was on moved abruptly and she fell. The strange mass began to rise higher and higher until she could finally make out a white dragon within it, though completely covered in black. The dragon inhaled deeply and spat out a huge column of fire. Quickly, Bill managed to raise a protective barrier around them and pronounced super alchemy. The dragon, far from stopping, continued to launch fire ceaselessly. Then, Bill explained that the barrier he had raised was an improved version of the one protecting the capital. Pori asked if it was a sacred barrier, to which Bill replied yes. The dragon, frustrated to see its flames had no effect, tried to break the barrier by force. At that moment, Bill reassured Pori and explained that he had improved the barrier in such a way that it not only protected against poisonous breath, but also reflected physical attacks. As a result, upon touching the protective barrier, the dragon was thrown violently aside. Just below where they were standing, and also under the spot where the dragon fell, the ground began to crack. The protagonist, astonished by what was happening, exclaimed that it was incredible. Without warning, the ground beneath their feet collapsed, and they plummeted. As they descended, the protagonist shouted that there was indeed a hidden space underground. The dragon fell alongside them, head down, and the hole that had formed quickly closed above their heads. During the fall, they were all protected by a magical barrier created by the protagonist, which disintegrated the moment they touched the ground. Immediately, Bill asked Pori if she was okay, and she replied that thanks to the barrier, they had somehow managed to survive. Not far from them, the dragon lay on the ground, making dreadful sounds. Then, the protagonist deduced that the dragon couldn't fly, so it was still under a curse. This revelation left Pori very surprised, as she didn't know that dragons could also be cursed. Bill, observing the dragon carefully, concluded that everything was just as he had imagined. With determination, he approached the dragon's body. Pori, scared, called him with a trembling voice, but he was already next to the dragon's head. At that moment, the dragon sat up, opened its huge, drooling mouth, and began to growl menacingly. Pori asked if it was angry because they had stepped on its tail, but the protagonist firmly denied that assumption. According to him, the dragon wasn't angry. It was crying. Pori, even more confused, could barely speak. Bill moved even closer to the dragon's head and spoke to it directly. He asked it to stay still for a moment, as he didn't know if what it felt was sadness or pain, but he promised he would soon alleviate its suffering. He then stared into the dragon's eyes. It immediately calmed down and buried its snout between the protagonist's legs. Then, Bill took out his magic hammer and declared that he would do it. With determination, He cast a spell of destruction, followed by one of recreation. The dragon's legs began to turn white, then its wings peeled away and also turned white, and finally, its entire body took on that pure color. The dragon let out a roar of joy. It then asked Bill if its whole body had returned to its normal color, to which the protagonist nodded and took the opportunity to ask if superior monsters could talk. The dragon reflected for a moment, and then revealed its name was Mason, and that's why it had the ability to communicate. Pori was dumbfounded, as she knew that name. Mason was a god who had descended to Earth. The dragon expressed its gratitude for being cured. Bill then introduced himself as a traveling blacksmith, and Pori, proudly, took his hand and said his full name was Bill. The dragon was surprised to hear that last name, and commented that it was the same as hers. The friends were bewildered. The dragon then explained that her name was Lori and that she had received these lands from the ancient king. The protagonist then understood the reason why the territory was called Deal Lori. Bill, recognizing his fault, apologized for entering her territory without permission. But the white dragon responded serenely that there was no problem, as the kingdom to which it belonged no longer existed. At that moment, the protagonist understood that the dragon was the rightful owner of the place. Curious, he asked why it had been cursed. The dragon thought for a moment and explained that since the king's death, it had been very sad. During its seclusion, it didn't realize it had been struck by a poisonous curse. Pori informed it that the wind it had generated reached the villagers living at the foot of the mountain, and they too were infected. At this, the white dragon became concerned and asked if that meant it had caused problems for its subjects. Bill tried to calm it, assuring it that it wasn't its fault. He then showed a magic seal that had been placed in that location through a spell. The dragon, surprised, wanted to know what it was. Bill explained that it was a concealment technique that inflated negative energy and at the same time served as a barrier to seal Mason. He stated that whoever had cast the curse was probably the same being called Chifukuin. The dragon reacted indignantly, as Chifukuin had even destroyed its home. The white dragon tried to eliminate the curse from the place using its power and energy, but soon understood that it had no effect. Then, Bill took out his magic hammer and told it to leave the reconstruction of the house in the hands of the blacksmith. At that moment, a bright light emerged, giving way to a process of disassembly and new creation. At first, everything began to crack, and then it broke into thousands of fragments. Surprisingly, a new house began to take shape, with an armchair, a fireplace, and on the ceiling, a huge chandelier. Astonished, she shouted that it was incredible. However, the house didn't stop there and continued to transform until it became a majestic castle. Bill pointed out that the magic barrier had also been destroyed, so it was now possible to enter and exit safely. At that instant, observing the dragon, he was perplexed, as Lori had transformed into a beautiful young woman. She, confused and surprised, asked if that castle had truly become a divine territory. Bill and Pori reacted in unison, repeating with disbelief the question, "A divine territory?" Lori ran to the armchair, sat comfortably, and explained that gods, when weakened, descend from the sky to the earth. In a divine territory, Mason could use 100% of its power and activate the technique to take human form. Therefore, the castle created by Bill had become a sacred domain. Bill was even more surprised and asked if he had really created a divine territory. At that moment, Lori noticed a mark on Bill's right hand and explained that it was the symbol of the sun disk, an extremely rare blessing known as the Golden Hand, the symbol of the bearer of the hand of the sun. Since the creation of the world, individuals who had borne that mark could be counted on one hand. Pori, excited, expressed her admiration for Lori's knowledge. Lori, for her part, added that the same symbol was present in her own domain. Bill, hearing this, showed genuine surprise. Then Lori led them to another hall and told them to look at the floor. There, clearly represented, was the symbol of the sun disk. Everyone was amazed by the exact coincidence. Lori commented that this place had been highly valued by the ancient king, although she admitted not fully understanding its true meaning. Looking around, she stated that apparently there were no visible changes. Bill, suspecting there might be a hidden mechanism, knelt down and touched the floor. Suddenly, both the symbol on the floor and the one on his hand began to glow intensely. Bill let out a short laugh of surprise while Pori and Lori called his name in fear. Then they understood that the floor was reacting to the mark, and that a mysterious force was pulling him into the glow. He closed his eyes, and a bright light filtered through his eyelids. Upon opening them slowly, he found himself in the center of a large hall. After leaving the room, he noticed that there was no one around. In front of him stood an intact city. Stunned, he wondered what this place was. Suddenly, a voice asked him if he was all right. Bill turned his head in all directions, but saw no one. He tried to call Lori and mentioned he had heard a voice inside his mind. Then Lori's voice, resonating directly in his thoughts, explained that it was telepathy, a amazing ability that allowed mental communication over great distances. Bill was deeply impressed. Meanwhile, Pori, visibly worried, remained next to the dragoness in the same hall where Bill had disappeared. Lori continued the mental communication, adding that it was even possible to share the five senses. Bill, becoming aware of his surroundings, noticed that the texture of the ground felt familiar, but at the same time he knew he was in another place, as if he were inside a city. He internally confirmed that this was the case. While exploring, he ran into an invisible wall and, touching it, commented that despite the light in the place, there was no visible sun. Lori, bewildered, wondered what that was. Bill deduced that it wasn't a real sky, but a carefully designed illusion, a completely artificial environment. Then an unexpected idea came to his mind. The symbol at the entrance, along with the artificially created structure, indicated that this whole magnificent city was actually the legendary workshop of Abisai. He remembered an old man had told him that no one could enter there, as Mazen's presence was so intense that it completely protected the place. Lori confirmed this information and compared the place's defense to a small guardian statue. Bill, smiling, noticed that the quality of the space varied in certain points. Touching his ring, magical whirlwinds formed and a corridor opened before him. Seeing this, Lori exclaimed that it was an extremely rare dungeon, the Fall of the Seven. Bill was speechless upon hearing that name. The dragon explained that according to legends, there were 7 hidden dungeons in the world, but until now only one had been discovered. Furthermore, she stressed that in this place, there was no trace of residual magical energy, no smells, no human signs. Absolutely no one had been here before. Bill was the first being to enter this site. Reflecting aloud, he pointed out that if Abisai had really created this workshop, it was very strange that there wasn't a single human footprint. As he ventured deeper, he found a mineral embedded in the wall and was breathless. That material did not seem to come from Kimui stone. He touched it with his hand, and an expression of enthusiasm lit up his face. It was an unknown mineral. He imagined that a new weapon could be made with it. His eyes shone with desire as he longed to obtain it. At that moment, Lori remembered that before arriving in this country, she had read in a large library that the walls of a dungeon were considered indestructible. Bill pointed out that the observable level of destruction was still in its first stage, and immediately drew his magic hammer to begin collecting the mineral. Lori, bewildered, asked him what exactly he was doing. Bill explained that he was using the technique called Destruction of All, an ability used by the Mazen gods. Lori, alarmed, shouted that this technique was extremely dangerous and had the power to erase everything that existed on Earth. Bill calmly confirmed it, and then opened his storage box, sending the extracted minerals directly to the furnace. At that, Lori insisted on stopping him and asked again what exactly he had done. Bill replied that it was one of the functions of the Golden Hand. Lori, increasingly surprised, commented that the Golden Hand was a blessing to which normally only a single high-level production ability was assigned. Then, Bill revealed that in his case, he possessed 5 distinct abilities: super processing, resolution of all, total recovery, among others. Lori couldn't believe what she was hearing and expressed it with disbelief. But Bill, undeterred, explained that he even disliked one of those abilities as it was a single-use technique. He added that it didn't matter at that moment, as the priority was to finish mapping the dungeon. Lori suggested walking the entire structure on foot, but Bill made some quick adjustments with his magic hammer and stated that he had already concluded the mapping. The dragon, surprised, asked when he had done it, and Bill replied that he had used his super processing ability. He then unrolled a folded map and showed it to Lori. She, completely bewildered, couldn't understand how he had obtained all that information inside the labyrinth. She wondered who this man really was. Bill explained that by striking the mineral, he had sent a wave through the ground that worked like sonar to explore the surroundings. The dragon, even more surprised, joked, asking if he was a bat, but immediately compared his power to that of God. Bill, however, denied both ideas and clarified that he simply had a certain talent for creating things, as he was nothing more than a blacksmith. Meanwhile, Pori was sitting on a balcony when she saw Bill returning, floating through the use of magic. Upon spotting him, she ran to him and hugged him tightly, confessing that she had been very worried. Bill, surprised, said that not even an hour had passed, but the dragon smiled and explained that in hidden dungeons, time flows differently than on the surface. In reality, 10 days had passed. Shocked by the revelation, Bill decided to apologize to Pori with a gift. She asked what kind of gift it was, and he placed a beautiful hairpin in her hair. He then stepped back a bit, and in a low voice, asked a question to check if she could hear him. Indeed, Pori heard him thanks to the hairpin. She was happy to be able to communicate with him no matter the distance. Excited, she hugged Bill and sincerely thanked him for the gift. Lori, who was watching the scene, was amazed to realize that it was an object with telepathic capabilities. Bill then explained that thanks to a suggestion from Lori, he had created the telepathic ornament by processing minerals extracted from the labyrinth's walls. The dragon declared that this meant the hairpin had become an indestructible telepathic artifact. She added that it was something amazing, hard to believe. In this context, Bill mentioned that he had a request for Lori. She, somewhat bewildered, was surprised at the idea of receiving a request. Sometime later, in the village of Loriamon, the mayor worked tirelessly despite his heavy cough. His granddaughter asked him to rest a little and not to push himself so hard, but he refused, insisting that he wanted to develop the village as quickly as possible. The granddaughter insisted that this was the responsibility of the lord of the territory. Suddenly, a scream interrupted the conversation. The young woman was paralyzed with fear. In front of her, a beautiful white dragon descended majestically. Noah, filled with awe, could barely articulate a word, and with great difficulty exclaimed that it was a dragon. At that instant, the protagonist descended from the dragon's back and announced to everyone that this creature was actually the god Lori. By then, almost the entire village had gathered in the square, watching in awe. Some villagers murmured in disbelief that the white dragon was a god. Noah asked why it had come, if the dragon god was supposed to be cursed. Suddenly, someone shouted, "Run!" and the crowd began to scatter in all directions. The dragon, surprised and deeply affected by the reaction, died. She murmured sadly that perhaps it would have been better not to have shown herself, as that way at least she wouldn't cause fear among the residents. At that moment, the protagonist asked her to wait. It was then that Pori, raising her voice, firmly exclaimed that everything was fine. The curse that had been cast on the white dragon god had been lifted thanks to the work of Lord Bill. Hearing this, the villagers stopped. Noah, incredulous, asked if the curse had really been lifted. Bill confirmed it with certainty, assuring them that now the curse would not spread anymore. He added that the white dragon god had also been a victim of a curse and wished to apologize for all the inconvenience caused. The dragoness was surprised by this intention to apologize. Then Bill turned to her and asked if she really wanted to offer an apology. As a response, he proposed that they provide some materials. Lori, bewildered, did not understand what he meant. She witnessed Bill remove one of the scales from Lori's plumage, which also surprised Pori. Tossing the scale into the air, the protagonist lifted his magic hammer and brought it down forcefully on it. Through his super processing ability, he first formed a ring of fire, and then the outlines of a building began to take shape. In the center of the construction stood a dragon statue, and from the interior of its stone mouth, water gushed as if from a living spring. In this way, the protagonist had created a dragon-shaped fountain. The mayor, upon seeing it, was dumbfounded and muttered that this couldn't be real. The fountain shone with all the colors of the rainbow. Noah, confused, asked what it was. Although the water didn't reach everyone directly, Noah's grandfather was pleased and claimed to feel a sudden increase in energy. Noah added enthusiastically that the water had healing properties. Pori, still bewildered, turned to the protagonist and asked for an explanation. Then Bill turned to her and the dragoness and explained that Lori's scales contained a healing power inherited from Maine. His idea was to harness that power in a fountain, so that the benefits would be eternal for the inhabitants of the place. Then Bill turned to the village, extended both arms in different directions, and shouted with a powerful voice that this was the healing energy of the white dragon god, and that whoever drank from this water would be immediately healed of illnesses and wounds. With solemnity, he proclaimed that this was an apology only a dragon god could offer, and urged the inhabitants to accept it. In response, the people fell to their knees and bowed deeply before the dragon, repeating with gratitude, "Thank you, dragon god." In the midst of the scene, the dragon communicated with Bill via telepathy to thank him. At that moment, an owl shrieked from the sky. Bill raised his head, surprised, and scratched the back of his neck. The owl descended quickly and perched on his shoulder. The protagonist was surprised. It was a messenger owl. The bird informed him that it brought a letter for him. Upon receiving it, The owl immediately took flight. Upon opening the message, Bill read that he was urgently required in the Empire. The hero of water had faced an unknown beast and was now seriously injured. The sacred ice sword had been destroyed. In the imperial capital of Carter, an alarm had been activated from the tower, demanding that the intruders retreat immediately. Carolina, the wielder of the sword, was fighting a monster of unknown origin. In search of Mr. Bill, the monster was extending tentacles into the street toward her, which Carolina cut with her sword. The limbs regenerated over and over again. Corey, the sword spirit, perched on her shoulder and warned her that this creature was not like the previous ones, so she should use weapon magic if all else failed. Carolina gripped the sword, raised it to the sky, and formed magic circles. She invoked the technique fragment of double-threaded moon. She unleashed all her power against the enemy. The explosion was enormous, and a monster disintegrated into thousands of fragments. Corey then uttered a spell, one that was sealed with the lunar cold of the full moon and the destruction of the crescent moon. According to him, whoever received this technique must die. However, something invisible threw Carolina violently. The monster had reappeared and dealt her a heavy blow. Injured, Carolina spat blood upon seeing the creature regenerate again. Corey, concerned, asked if she was okay. She only looked at it with sadness and began to walk towards the monster. Carolina called out, not understanding its intention, and asked where it was going. Corey turned to look at her one last time and thanked her. He said he was happy that she had used the sword, but Carolina shouted in desperation that he shouldn't do it. In that instant, Corey fused with the sword, becoming a single entity. Absolute Zero was the last word before launching against the enemy. Carolina screamed his name desperately. Suddenly, she woke up abruptly in a bed, sitting up with her hand outstretched as if still trying to stop Corey. The protagonist was by her side. Carefully, he laid her back on the pillow and assured her that everything would be all right, that she needed a rest. Carolina, through tears, expressed that Corey had died and couldn't stop crying. Meanwhile, on the roof of the house, the dragons slept peacefully, while a group of curious onlookers watched from below. Carolina, still sobbing, clung to her memories, and the protagonist thought with deep understanding that it was no wonder, as the sacred sword had been like family to her. At that moment, Corey approached and asked Bill if there was a possibility of repairing that sword. Bill reflected briefly and questioned why Hapasai had been in charge of its maintenance. He explained that, like a person, a sacred sword could not recover its original state once broken. Therefore, maintenance was essential. If the sword broke, it was the end. This answer unsettled Corey, who expressed her bewilderment. Meanwhile, Carolina whispered Corey's name, apologizing for not saying goodbye or thanking him properly, gently holding a fragment of the sword in her hands. Bill, noticing that fragment, asked if it was the core of Isabel. Carolina repeated the word core, not fully understanding. Bill explained that this fragment contained the source of the sacred sword's power and that even a part of the hilt was visible. With determination, he promised that he would try to restore the sword. Carolina, with hope and fear intertwined, asked if it was really possible. Bill, hesitating, admitted that it probably was, although if he made even the slightest mistake, the sword could disappear forever. In that instant, he understood that he could end up destroying with his own hands what represented family to Carolina. She, clinging to the fragment, expressed that living without Corey was equivalent to death, and finally handed it to the blacksmith. Bill looked at her seriously and said he understood. He took out his magic hammer, while remembering that not even the old man had been able to repair a lesser sacred sword, and now he had to try to restore a major sword whose body no longer existed. He wondered if he would be able to create a physical form for such a complex artifact. At the same time, Carolina, still with faith, whispered to the particle she held to please come back. Bill raised the hammer, and a magical light began to radiate from it. In his mind, the design of the iceberg was outlined, everything that was needed, the process, the techniques. He gathered his 5 production abilities, combined ancient knowledge, and forged a new technique within himself. He channeled all the energy into his hammer and precisely struck the particle that Carolina had entrusted to his hands. Meanwhile, outside the castle, the monster's claws emerged from the ice. Lakia watched attentively. That creature, which had been sealed by the hero of ice and the sacred sword at the cost of their lives, was manifesting again. Behind her, a huge army awaited. The monster unleashed its tentacles towards the battalion. Lakia ordered them to fire. The limbs shattered into pieces. But the commander reported that the monster although killed by the hero, was now regenerating with surprising speed. Lakia expressed her annoyance with sarcasm and launched her attack, summoning the Thunder Serpent to strike the monster. She joked with disdain, asking if the monster felt the tickle of the attack. However, the tentacles persisted. The soldiers tried to take them down, but someone warned that touching them could make them lose their strength. Lakia cursed and acknowledged that the electricity could kill her. At that instant, the commander shouted, terrified, that the ice restraint would soon disappear. Lakia made a firm decision, ordered the army to retreat, and prepared to act alone. She announced that she would use the Sacred Swords technique. One of the soldiers tried to stop her, pointing out that this technique would drain all her magical energy and shorten the weapon's lifespan. But she silenced him and reaffirmed her determination. She ordered everyone to retreat and focus on protecting the capital. She then apologized to her whip, Sander, for being a rough owner. The weapon replied that it was no problem, that its resolution had been made long ago. Although Lakia was neither modest nor refined, he enjoyed fighting by her side. Lakia thanked him sincerely. Just at that moment, the monster's tentacles approached again. Lakia removed her eye patch and shouted with force, "Divine Eye of the Time Lord, activate!" She launched into the attack. Her weapon generated magic circles, completely enveloping her and transforming her into a living weapon. She then invoked the technique of the Electric Emperor, the World Serpent. In the center of all the energy that emerged, the head of a magic serpent appeared, with Lakia as its core. The impact against the monster generated a devastating explosion. Lakia, who was fighting nearby, was thrown violently, and as she fell, her artifact broke in her hands. Still in the air, she held a fragment of the object and muttered with resignation that it was all over. At that precise instant, Bill's hammer struck with magical force, and Lakia landed on her feet with the whip intact in her hand. Immediately, Lakia looked surprised to find Bill behind her, while the majestic white dragon destroyed the monster's tentacles to prevent them from hurting anyone else. Then, the protagonist explained that this weapon was not simply an object, but a protector for its wielder, an extension of the family, and immediately restored both Lakia's artifact and Carolina's weapon. Shortly after, Bill approached the monster and reprimanded it for destroying a very important weapon, causing misfortune to people, wondering if that pleased the creature. It was at that moment that the protagonist, in a threatening tone, declared that he was now terribly angry. In response, the monster launched a tentacle, and Lakia shouted at the protagonist to be careful. Without wasting time, in an agile leap, she brandished her whip and explained that if they cut it, the tentacle would regenerate immediately. However, upon hitting and severing it, she was surprised to see that it did not regenerate. Raising her whip enthusiastically, she shouted that the protagonist was incredible, for not only had he repaired Sander, but he had also improved it. Motivated by the situation, Pori took her sword and rushed to attack, managing to cut several more tentacles. Yuzora, worried, warned her to be careful, as those tentacles were cursed and absorbed the life from artifacts. Meanwhile, the monster's main body slowly approached. The lion god named Lori watched in amazement and muttered that it couldn't be. At that moment, the monster attacked again with its tentacles, and Yuzora commented with alarm that the situation was out of control. Facing the growing threat, the protagonist shouted for everyone to retreat, and immediately after, he used a super tense body modification enhancement that left everyone surprised. Then, firmly, he assured them that he would take care of it. To provoke the enemy, he began to yell at it to come closer, while Pori replied that she was faster, taking the opportunity to ask him how he had performed such a body modification. Amidst the tension, the lion struck the ground with its claw. Then, the protagonist explained, brandishing his hammer, that this technique consisted of a body enhancement that used all the principles of super-dense strengthening, temporarily transforming his body cells into superhuman cells. Lakia, amazed, raised her arms and exclaimed that this was just what she expected from him. For her part, Lori shouted at him to wait, adding that this lion was just like her, possessed by an evil spirit and suffering. The protagonist, with a comprehensive expression, replied that he understood everything. Those red stones implanted in its forehead were disgusting, and clearly the creature was suffering. He explained that the stone was embedded in the lion's brain, and that removing it by force could be fatal. However, Lakia interrupted him, stating that it was just like her right eye, while Bill, silently, thought about how terrible that project was. Shortly after, the lion lunged to attack. The protagonist reacted immediately, brandished his hammer, and shouted that he would fix it soon. He struck the lion on the head, causing a transformation, a great destruction of everything, and a process of super recycling. Seeing the result, Lori asked if it was still alive, and the protagonist replied that it needed to rest a bit. That everything was fine now, as he had destroyed the cursed eye. With a trembling voice, the lion asked if she was alive. The protagonist, surprised, asked if it was a girl, as he thought it was a boy. Upon receiving confirmation, he affirmed that yes, she was still alive. She, with tears in her eyes, said that he hadn't killed her, but saved her, and thanked him deeply. Tenderly, the protagonist approached her, caressed her, and asked her to please take care of herself. She began to walk away and shouted with energy that one day they would meet again. At this, Lakia commented in a competitive tone that she now had one more rival, while Bill, still impressed, stated that this god was surprisingly more alive than they thought. Suddenly, a plant sprouted from the ground and said in a grave voice, "Don't joke around." It then asked why its cursed artifact had been destroyed and the lion was still alive. The protagonist, without hesitation, knelt and replied that it had finally come out, that he had been watching it with a soldier's eyes all this time, while the main body hid in the dungeon. He then asked who it really was, and the plant, in a defiant tone, asked him how he knew its plan. The protagonist confessed that he knew nothing, that he had simply changed the structure of the cursed artifact. And then, indignant, he asked if it was playing with lives, stating that something like that wasn't worth repairing. The plant, laughing sinisterly, demanded that he fix it and declared that the greatest artifact had been created by the 7 goddesses of fortune, and that the plant's name was the same as the 7 goddesses of fortune, and that its name was Tsukamagami, so no one should interfere with its mission to destroy all artifacts. Faced with such a threat, the protagonist raised his hammer and declared with determination that before allowing it, he would take responsibility and destroy it. The plant challenged him to try, releasing its tentacles. Pori shouted that she would cover him, but the protagonist replied that it was impossible, that if she touched it, the sky above her head would collapse. Then, with force, he pushed his hammer forward and shouted that if they couldn't attack directly, they would do so with the help of the artifact. He activated the Iron Forest recording, causing many spears to emerge from the ground. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough, as the tentacles managed to pass through without difficulty. Faced with this unexpected turn, the protagonist was deeply surprised, and both Lakia, Pori, and Lori watched everything completely shocked. Next, the monster mocked him cruelly, calling him a fool and stating that it was useless to continue, as it could not be harmed by anything created by humans. It then activated the golden hand and arrogantly declared that if the situation were reversed, only a perfect weapon would be capable of defeating a god. It was then that he used the connection of the mill and the tape. He threw his hammer at the monster, who, full of confidence, assured that he would pulverize it without difficulty. However, in a surprising twist, a sacred sword embedded itself in the monster's tentacles, who, stupefied, exclaimed that he didn't understand why the protagonist had a sacred sword if he was supposed to possess only one sacred weapon. In that instant, the protagonist landed on the ground, and with a firm voice confirmed that was so, but immediately added that this was his only real perfect weapon. Just then a cube appeared above him, and looking up, he solemnly declared that he had created a sacred sword, as only that type of weapon could harm a god. The monster, bewildered, asked if it was a fake, but the protagonist, while extending his hand with a hammer in front, replied that he didn't like that term and revealed his final ability: infinite copy of creations. The monster, startled, repeated in disbelief the term infinite, and the protagonist explained that the mallet contained hidden memories of sacred weapons forged by the ancient bearers of the Golden Hand, and that as long as magic existed, he could replicate them and temporarily summon those imitations. Immediately, fakes of the most powerful legendary weapons appeared, flying directly towards the monster. For her part, Pori was paralyzed upon seeing such a spectacle, her mouth completely open in surprise, and she wondered aloud if all those were really sacred weapons. Lakia, equally stunned, recognized several of them and muttered names like Gungnir, Aegis, and Excalibur, while Lori, completely bewildered, wondered if they were in a museum of sacred weapons. Faced with such reactions, the protagonist responded with determination that this would be the end. The monster, still resisting, shouted that it would not allow it and that it would end everything itself. Pori, worried about what could happen, warned the protagonist that the dungeon was dangerous and could not be attacked. And he, in response, asked the monster if it had also copied the dungeon. He then explained that these were ephemeral replicas that disappeared shortly after being created, although he immediately generated them again and launched them at the enemy once more. Afterwards, he calmly apologized for the delay and the disaster, stating that the hunt for the 7 gifts would defeat it without fail. Later, after a period of calm, the group returned to their lodging. Pori was standing, holding a plate of fruit, when Yuzora approached and asked her to step aside, claiming the protagonist was hers. Lakia, for her part, did not stay behind and told Yuzora to leave, as he was her master and she would be the one to feed him. Yuzora, visibly annoyed, retorted that Lakia hadn't even beaten him yet, but Lakia immediately replied that it was none of her business. Pori, trying to calm the mood, pointed out that they shouldn't fight over it and assured that she could handle it on her own. Meanwhile, the protagonist sat quietly on the bed with a smile and mentioned that his magic had already recovered, so he could eat without help. In unison, they insisted that it wasn't necessary and that he should rest. Then, curious about the evident tension, he asked them if they got along well or poorly. And in response, they all began to bring him food. Shortly after, Artemis entered the room, greeted him, and asked how he was feeling. In addition, she recommended he undergo a complete medical examination, stating that he was the Empire's treasure. Yuzora, indignant, questioned since when he belonged to the Empire, remembering that he was from the kingdom and should not become imperial property. At that, the protagonist explained that he had received a noble title from the Empire, which left Yuzora perplexed. She asked him if that meant he was no longer the hero of the kingdom and now belonged to the Empire. He replied that everything was fine, and with a kind tone added that he would also take care of her. This caused Yuzora to blush intensely, and overwhelmed, she ran out of the room, saying she was going for a walk. The protagonist, still confused, wondered if she was so happy just because he had taken care of the sacred sword. Artemis, seriously, replied that having saved the Empire from an unprecedented crisis, he could no longer be handed over to another country, and that he was now a great hero of the Empire. The protagonist, visibly uncomfortable, commented that calling him a great hero was an exaggeration, but Lakia firmly contradicted him, saying that if he hadn't arrived, the Empire would have fallen without a doubt, as Tsukumagami's power was on a completely new level. As a sign of gratitude, they all bowed and expressed their sincere thanks. The protagonist, surprised by such a gesture, closed his eyes and humbly replied that he had done nothing special, that he had just been lucky to match up well with that monster, and that the true strength resided in the sacred weapon, not in him. Lakia let out a laugh, and Pori commented that despite everything, he was still a rather strange guy. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Seer was thrown into the street with the order to disappear. Desperate, she began to pound on the door and shout for someone to open it, as she had no one else to trust, pleading for help through sobs. At that moment, they showed her a newspaper with an alarming headline stating that her trading company was on the verge of bankruptcy. They immediately told her that if you counterfeit products, it's natural to end up ruined. After that, they demanded she leave and coldly shut the door. Unable to contain her emotions, Seer collapsed to the ground, crying inconsolably while muttering that the artisans no longer came, that no one bought their products, and that there was nothing more she could do, recognizing with resignation that the only thing left was to go to him. So, taking the newspaper with trembling hands, she began to walk down the street. At the same time, on one of the city's streets, Second stood carrying a huge bag full of weapons, and laughing enthusiastically, he wondered aloud how many customers would be there, before putting the bag on the ground and shouting animatedly for everyone to come and see all the items they so longed to get. Then 2 people approached him and curiously offered to take a look. So Second began to untie the bag while stating that they were in luck. And upon opening it, he proudly added that he had done it, surprising those present to discover that among the whole pile was supposedly the legendary Excalibur, as well as Iggy's Agabo. Firmly, Second assured them that all these were legendary items, and that the price for each was only 1,000 gold coins, which led one of the buyers to pick up one of the swords and ask, amazed, if they were really selling Excalibur for that price. While a confident Second rubbed his hands together and thought he would make a fortune, since in reality, those were nothing more than simple roadside stones disguised as weapons. Next, the buyers began to test the weapons, and one of them mentioned that his initial spell was not compatible with Excalibur, but he still wanted to try. So he brandished the sword and cut a block of ice. Then Second, full of pride, spread his arms to the sides, raised his head, and asked what they thought, assuring them that this was the strength of a true legendary weapon, which caused people to start running towards the pile of weapons, jumping on it and shouting that they would buy them, as they were very cheap. However, just when everything seemed a success, the buyer who was testing the sword asked them to wait. And second, turning to him, told him not to rush, reminding him that he wanted to get Excalibur for 1,000 coins. But the buyer replied with contempt that he wouldn't pay a single coin for that piece of junk.